Hello and welcome to the show. Today we're discussing tourism, travel and COVID-19, the new narrative for Southern and Eastern Africa during a crisis vortex.
Hi everyone. My name is Navlika Ratangee and I'm currently the Clinical Operations Director at ICAS, which is an employee wellbeing program to different clients in South Africa. We have a lot of clients in the travel and tourism industry as well, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. My background is that of a clinical psychologist as well.
Wonderful, thank you. And then Kobus.
Hi there, my name is Kobus Scholtz. I have my own company called The Human Equation, and I have been in training and development all my life. I started off at Anglo-American in the human resources development, mostly focused on the behavioral science of training, never been involved in the technical component of training. And in 1998, I took a leap of faith and I started my own consultancy. And I have been blessed very much working with amazing companies, Sasol, PPC, Premier, Bacomo, Pioneer. Yes, primarily involved in leadership development and all the behavioral components around that, but very much involved in the neuroscience of leadership. It's an amazing topic, it's very relevant. We learn every day more and more stuff. So to me, the challenge is how do we connect an amazing model with how the brain functions? Because often it's just the cognitive understanding of a particular model per se, but it doesn't really change behavior. And that always fascinated me. How do we connect and create synergy between very significant models, but that we can see the results and the change in behaviors of leaders and people in general? So that's in a brief summary.
Fantastic, very exciting, and I'm very excited to delve a little bit deeper into that in the sort of coming conversation. Thank you for sharing. Sarah.
Hi there, hi everyone. Yeah, my name's Sarah Habsburg. I'm from England originally. I'm currently in Austria, but I spent the last 2 decades in South America and just moved over back to Europe last year. I was tour leader across the Latin American continent for about 10 years and stayed in so many cool places that I wanted to create my own. And I bought some land in southern Chile in a tourist hub at the foot of a live volcano, and that's where I set my place up. I've had a couple of small pre-COVID events in my life, which set me in a great stead to be helping the people who I later led consultancy for in the hospitality industry. First was the 27th of February 2010 earthquake in Chile, the 8.8 earthquake, and that stopped tourism overnight. As you can imagine, everything just collapsed, and I was running my own backpackers hostel at that time. We survived, obviously, and the business kept on growing, and that was great. But later I moved into consultancy after doing a master's in responsible tourism because I was very interested in how this tourism hub, which started off as a very small town, grew phenomenally and far too fast within a very short space of time. And so I did my master's focusing on sustainable destinations, etc., and worked alongside the municipality to help build a plan really to how we could help this place grow not too fast, as it already had started obviously showing signs of. And so at that time I was consulting for small independent hotels, hostels, lodges, always in marketing and business practice. And then we had the volcanic eruption. We were just 17k from this volcano. 3rd of March 2015, apocalyptic images across the globe before Chile had even woken up that morning. It happened in the early hours of the morning, and again everything stopped. No flights, no reservations, just some very brave journalists and photographers. And so that was my second pre-COVID whammy. I had hoped that I would never have to use the crisis strategies again that I put together for my clients at that time and for my business after the earthquake. But the world has a different plan for me. So that's why I'm sharing the knowledge and the resources that I created then. in relation to the COVID pandemic that we have right now. So I'm working online, consulting again, and I created this 6-part resource series to help businesses across the globe, and they've been very well received.
Fantastic, Sarah, and thank you. We'll dive a little bit deeper into that, but I just wanted to ask a question, if I could. The first 2 sort of events that you experienced, there was almost no sort of warning, well, no warning really. And after the first time, you experienced something like this, and then the second time having experienced it, now with COVID, were you able to hit the ground fairly quickly running, or was there a timeline where you had to sort of adapt the methodology that you previously used to this pandemic?
Yeah, great question. The first 2, I think I pretty much hit the ground running fast after the volcanic eruption, because it was the same place, same community, same market that I was looking at. And so that wasn't too, apart after the first, oh no, not again, then yes, it was quite hit the ground running fairly fast. With COVID, I'd had a big life change anyway, moving from South America over to Austria, and I was building up a new consultancy on this side of the Atlantic, but still consulting for my companies over there, in the company I was working for over there in South America. And so when it hit, I was almost compelled to modify the information I already had. I really just sat down, I looked at what I'd already done, and I said, okay, this is all so relevant, and there are so many people out there suffering right now. So I created more information about social distancing, because that was something that wasn't relevant in the fallout from the earthquake or the volcanic eruption. And yeah, just said, okay, the general marketing inspiration element, the social media marketing, it was all relevant. So it was a matter of tweaking it and putting it onto a platform, and just getting it out there. Yeah.
And the reception to the material so far, I mean, have you, who's using the material that you're putting out? Because I mean, the book Tourism, Travel and COVID-19, we've got so many players in this industry. Who's it the most relevant to?
It's all great question. Yeah, it's all written specifically for the target market that I've always had in my consultancy, and the specific interest and experience that I have personally, and that's small independent hotels, hostels, B&Bs and lodgers. So it's the accommodation sector specifically. It has ramifications. People can read it who manage operators or agencies, etc. But there's a lot of crossover, but it's written specifically for accommodation options, accommodation industry.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we'll dive a little bit deeper into your section next.
Hello, hi. I'm Mandisa Magwaxaza, for the benefit of everybody listening. I am a born and bred Eastern Cape girl, and I fell into tourism straight after studying at Rhodes University, because I grew up in a community, a farming community, just on the verge of the conservation evolution that was happening in the Eastern Cape. And I was curious, I watched my family's lives change because of tourism, and I wanted to get in and find out, what was on the other side. And I fell in love with it. So I've been in tourism ever since. I love it. I've lived in Cape Town because I followed it all the way there to get into the heat of the industry. And yeah, so I came to contribute to the book from that experience of speaking for and representing communities that are by and large marginalized a lot of the time, and sometimes only used as a recreational benefit without any real sustainable rewards. So yeah, and that's me. I hope I've done a good job of introducing myself.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then Shanaleigh, maybe you can sort of introduce yourself and then just put into context how the book came about and how it started, and then the various players involved in the book, firstly with our panel, and then any sort of noticeable sort of highlights of the book, if you could.
Okay, sure. So everyone, I'm Shanaleigh Hebbard. My entry into the tourism industry started in Namibia, where my husband and myself, we managed 4 lodges in the Kalahari. I was in charge of the reception, the finance office, and very soon dragged into all spheres of the industry. After a couple of years, I decided I need to go find my own way, and I opened my own franchise. It was an American franchise. It was basically a gym for ladies, and very soon I got very intrigued with the inner workings of these ladies coming and hearing their stories and all the obstacles they had to overcome, and I often found that I couldn't really help them. So that helped me to go into neuro-linguistic programming, where I became an evolved coach, and further that went into becoming a strengths finder, facilitator, and coach as well. I really love the inner workings of the mind, how people think, their stories, and somehow after there was a little bit of personal upheavals in my life with a dear loved one of mine who passed away, and also with a 4th child that came along, I just thought I needed 2 years of just some quiet time to renew, refresh, and just not some me time. But I soon realized that as much as I am a mom and I love my children, I have a very active brain, and I wanted to be part of something else and come back into the business world. And that's where I got an opportunity to enter the other spectrum of the industry, and that was working for a US-based tour operator company that specializes in student travel, FITs, luxury accommodation, and very soon I found myself working with the logistics of student travel, and I truly loved that component of the business because it wasn't just bringing students from America over to have a good time here, but they were really part of communities. They got their hands dirty, and they really got to see the bigger picture and take a piece of Africa, a piece of history back home with them. So that was truly fulfilling work for me, to see the change that happened when these students landed on African soil and they took a piece of that back with them. And then lately with the COVID-19, it was going to be the best business year ever. We had something like 6 groups signed up that was coming to South Africa, student groups, and then 2 groups were going to Kenya, and then COVID-19 happened, and all of that business went away. With that, also, I lost my employment. So it was a hard situation to face, and that is just where the book also started. It actually started before I didn't have employment anymore, and maybe this is where I will just transition as how the book came about. It was round about the end of February when I returned back from visiting various lodges and community projects in Mpumalanga and the Northwest, and we arrived home, and my husband was asked by Knowledge Resources to share Knowledge Resources invited my husband and various industry experts to share multiple perspectives on how companies can manage this coronavirus that was coming. It was an unknown for many people, but they could see the trend that coronavirus was hitting South Africa, and very soon we will also be going down into the lockdown level. So they were very proactive, and they got this book together, and my husband was one of the contributors of this book. So when he came home, I read the book. I obviously read his chapter first, and then I read all the other things, and I felt truly inspired. There was no solution given, but there was definitely inspiration, hope, and some form of toolkit, some type of guideline that companies could follow that would help these companies. And I will never forget it. It was the first weekend of lockdown. After I had spoken to my friends in tourism, I'd spoken to colleagues, customers, and everyone was just numb. They didn't know what to do, where to go, where to find the answers. It was just absolute disbelief, hopelessness. And I just felt for everyone. I didn't have the answer. And I just thought, well, listen here, if a book can be accomplished in 14 days, from ideation to being published in 14 days, And it has provided some guidelines and help, and someone, I felt inspired by it. Certainly there can be a book like this for the tourism industry. Now, this was well before any of the associations came together with their webinars. And I mean, very soon there was an avalanche of webinars, and there was a lot of information being thrown out there. And it's been very valuable. But I then approached Knowledge Resources, and they gave me the thumbs up and said they will work with me. I motivated why this is important for tourism. I then approached various people, and let me tell you, there was numerous times when people just responded, nope, I'm not interested, I can't contribute to the book. And I totally understood that. I respected those decisions because people were going through a tremendous amount of crisis management. And I think maybe the last thing on their mind was writing a book when they didn't know how the story was going to end. But the one thing is, I just visioned a book that will help people. That's all I focused on. And that is all that I believe, you know, I was put, the right people came across my path, and I found those people. And it definitely happened. In the moment from conception to getting the thumbs up from Knowledge Resources to having a published book took 10 weeks. Originally, what I thought the book was going to be like, it exceeded my expectations. I am truly happy. I know this is not the end of the story, but I am so grateful and honored for the people I got to work with, for the stories that are being told there, the guidelines, toolkits, and I truly believe it's a valuable book. And it is a book that's going to be here, and it's part of history. So I've had, just a wonderful privilege of meeting new people, being inspired by their stories, and that collectiveness has just done wonders for me, and I believe for anyone out there as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I really do appreciate you sort of putting all of this together. I mean, I think the one thing that I've taken from my limited experience in this process is been the kindness and willingness for people to distribute information and help. You know, at the forefront of everything I've experienced with anyone who's involved in tourism, if you ask, and people are always receptive to assistance. I think in the beginning it was a little bit difficult. Everyone, like you said, was in crisis management, and I'm sure we can speak a little bit more about that, what your mind's going through during those times. But I think given the amount of time that's passed, how everyone's starting to react and default to their original setting, which in the majority of the cases is kindness and really wanting to put your best suit forward, which I found everyone's involvement to be. So I just want to say thank you to everyone before we get started, and I'm really excited. And yeah, I think we can jump straight in. I think Sarah, you're up first, if that's okay.
That's okay.
And I wanted to sort of handle some sort of practical elements to the book, because your points are very. I'm sorry, my wife's just let my big fluffy poodle in, and she's shaking her head. So if you guys hear that in the background, I do apologize. But it's impossible to keep them out. So as I mentioned, Sarah, sorry, your points are very practical, actionable, and they provide a great framework for businesses to take on. I think a lot of these action points, though, inevitably will, I hope not, but technology will be on the forefront of a lot of these action points, from what I can see. You know, making sure that you have a point of sale system or a CRM system, or adopting sort of a more analytical sort of standpoint as well. That's going to be important, understanding what works and what doesn't work. From my sort of experience working with companies, usually that results in taking a more technological approach. And do you think sometimes jobs will be at sacrifice there to some extent?
I actually don't. I really don't believe that will happen. I'm talking from the perspective of accommodation suppliers. Yeah. So if you think of a small or a small size hotel, I believe that the people are so important to the industry as a whole. You can't have hospitality without people behind the scenes. It just doesn't work. I do understand the reason for, say, contactless check-ins, etc., and that has a place right now. It does have a place, but I don't think it's something that will stay forever. There have always been hotels that have had contactless check-ins, and right now there are probably a lot more taking it up. I don't think it's something that will stay forever. What you were just saying about CRM systems and PMS systems, etc., lots of hotels run with these anyway, and if they didn't have one, then this crisis is just going to highlight to them the need to improve their customer management, and somebody has to be behind that. A system doesn't just appear in your reception and work on its own. You actually, if anything, we need to retrain staff at a higher level for better customer service, and I'm extremely passionate about that. That was my thesis for my master's. It was all about customer service, and I truly believe that if you have the right people and you treat them well and you train them, that they will stay and help you create a better business. And so in a nutshell, I really don't think this will make a massive impact. We're going to see, of course, a negative impact on jobs because businesses will close. And some businesses will, in this interim period, when they don't really know what's going to happen, when they can't see what the future holds for them, of course they're looking at cutting costs. And I'm sure hotels have had to extremely begrudgingly let people go. I'm very involved with the size of hotels and lodges and B&Bs, the kind where it's a small team, and the manager or the owner, they know the names of the children of all their staff. You know, I'm not talking about bigger hotels, and my opinion on that, or my experience on that, is not my expertise at all. And so I'm talking about those smaller places. And so if someone has had to be let go at the moment because this initial impact has meant that their salaries just can't be paid, then I'm hoping that these businesses can then survive using the right strategies, and then these people can gain their jobs back, if anything, in a better position, because they're going to hopefully then be led through training, which helps the companies offer better service and be better businesses in the future. So yeah, we need real people behind the sales funnel that we have right now. People need peace of mind. I've been saying this all along. We need to sell peace of mind. And again, that just doesn't happen from an Instagram post or from updating the website. We need to have somebody who's trained in this and who can almost hold the hand of the post-COVID guest by saying, right from the first interest they have in this hotel or B&B or lodge or whatever it is, right from the first interest, somebody needs to be trained and have that empathy and the right state of mind and be in the right position to hold that hand and say, this is where you're at right now. This is who we are. This is what we offer. This is our reality. This is our truth today. This is what we can offer you. And we're in the convincing process of someone to book in that sales funnel. Somebody needs to be there, and they need to be trained. A machine is not going to do that. They're just tools that help you collate the information to be able to have better customer management in the future. So yeah, I believe it's all about looking towards higher levels of excellence in customer service through retraining and excellence in training, high training, and using the online tools in the right way.
Yeah, it was a somewhat loaded question because I've in my sort of personal experience, that's been what a lot of companies have started doing is taking on systems that they haven't before and trying to sort of validate that with, that it could take the role of potentially 2 or 3 jobs, but then very quickly realizing, in your responses to them, sorry, we're understaffed at the moment, but we can't get back to you. But hang on, you've just taken on all these systems that are now allowing you to do the job a lot more streamlined, and then realizing that it is actually, there's far more that goes into just having a streamlined, CRM system or more automated marketing or sales process. It's actually that the human element doesn't fall away at all. It's just accentuated by these systems that you're putting in place, allowing you to spend more time with the customer on a personal selling approach, as opposed to just having an Instagram post go live every couple of days and that kind of thing. So I'm really glad sort of you aimed at it that way. So I think South Africa's economy was already in a fairly bad shape before the lockdown, and with the current sort of economic climate, I'm hoping that mass retrenchments won't loom, but inevitably I think they will. A lot of people are being put on sort of temporary leave without pay, and with so many people and potential clients going through this, how do you think it will affect our domestic tourism within South Africa, compared to what the domestic tourism looked like before COVID-19?
Okay, I think that promoting domestic tourism is nothing new. This is just highlighted right now. South Africa has had a domestic tourism growth strategy. I was reading it the other day, 2011 to 2020 period. They were pretty much, almost at the end of this strategy when COVID hit. Of course, the pandemic changes the strategy that was on paper for that period. So now it's about picking the focus areas that can be relevant to this post-COVID process. I think that keeping your backyard clean, it's a very loaded phrase, if you like, because domestic tourists tend to be a lot more, in my experience, careful of the environment that they're in, because it's their home, it's their backyard. And so they tend to think a little more, be a little more kind. It's just some experience I've had in that area. It might not necessarily translate across the world. But also, South Africa has so many natural resources now, 290 conservation parks, 10 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And I think this is the moment to actually be selling this, promoting pride in these enviable, world-class destinations that are just there on the doorstep for domestic tourists in South Africa. Now you need to tap into the need to go into nature. Everyone's feeling that after lockdown now. Selling the emotional benefits of this, and also moreover the peace of mind. How to do it is through collaboration and thinking outside the box. We've been using this word so often recently. Collaboration in the sense of letting go of the selfish need to sell, each person who has a business, and actually then saying, okay, what do I do best? What's the USP? What's the best thing that I do? And how can I work alongside somebody else to create a package so that we all get a piece of the pie? And thinking outside the box, I'm referring to differentiated marketing. So this is nothing new either. Most people who have tourists coming in from international and domestic areas in the past have always looked at this as two different strategies now. So, there's a strategy for creating specific packages for bank holiday weekends that are only relevant to the people who live in the country where that bank holiday is happening. Shopping and wine tourism. Wine tourism, I believe, is actually very big in the domestic area anyway in South Africa. A lot of people from South Africa go to do wine tourism. I was reading a little about that the other day. Low season promotions to try to combat seasonality is also a way to attract more locals, because you haven't got your international tourists coming in the low season areas. Points redemption schemes, loyalty schemes. There are lots of things that you can do as an individual business, but also there are quite a lot of things that need provincial government assistance, like improving the tourist information centres. That's something that's crucial. And so in one tourist information centre in one province, they're in communication with the ones in the next province, or the information is shared so that you can help people to travel once intra-provincial travel is lifted. That's going to be important, so people can see how they can create a trip. And also, I think something like thinking outside the box, a domestic travel card that offers reductions, or a South Africa road trip app. Something that, the way that people travel today is everyone has a mobile in their hand, a cell phone. What do you call them in South Africa? Cell phones or mobile?
Cell phones, yeah.
Cell phones, okay. Everyone travels with a cell phone in their hand. And that's something that I know it won't happen overnight, but that's the kind of outside the box thinking that we need to be able to make a better impression for domestic travel in the future. I also think that this is something that we can't consider to be a temporary action. This is just a really great opportunity to focus on this area, and it's something that should be seen as something that's going to continue in the future. Not least and not only because those elderly Europeans, for example, who might be returned travelers to South Africa, they probably won't travel in the next year or so. If they're in an age group that puts them at a COVID risk, then they are more likely to be the ones who will stay at home. And I'm just using that as a small example. There's a huge amount of international travelers in the right age group, and family travel and student travel, etc., that will return to Africa. South Africa, I have no doubt. But just taking that as a particular example, there will be a slight reduction in international arrivals for health reasons once the international restrictions are lifted. And so there is it's so valuable to think about domestic travel as having such an important role in the sustainability of destinations, because it gives us this immense opportunity to contribute to priorities that are of national interest, such as economic growth, job creation, and poverty alleviation. And so this is not just a knock-on effect of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's how it's accelerated it. That's not how we should look at it, though. It's not just a knock-on effect. Let's do this for a while, see what happens, get some domestic tourists in, make a bit of money, and then wait for the international restrictions to be open. I think anyone trying to create a strategy now to promote domestic travel should be thinking about it in the long run and using that kind of collaborative and thinking outside the box thinking to help them move forward with that.
Fantastic. And you know, I think you mentioned collaboration a couple of times, and how do you think that conversation goes? You know, there are so many players involved in that process. Is it just a point of having that as the forefront of your messaging, and staying true to that messaging? Because it has to be a long-term process. It can't just be for the short term, for the next 6 months, and then we move on to focusing on international travel again. So how would you phrase that conversation as a starting point, do you think?
Well, I have an experience with one of my clients is actually in southern Spain, and they've just created a package including 5 players in the last 2 weeks. Literally, it's just happened. And it's been sold now. And so that started with a conversation. It was an idea that came about just of a conversation like we just had. And it was actually first started with a hotel who contacted a cafe, who then contacted an airport pickup driver. And this was done privately. And I think there's a lot of potential for people to just drop the fear, perhaps, of thinking that if they create a package with someone else, they're not going to make as much money as if they did it all themselves. Sure. It's about being a little humble and being in the right state of mind to say, okay, we all need help right now. Let's share this process. And being the first. Once one person steps forward and says, hey, let's have a go at this. Let's see what we can do. They begin to build a trust relationship. Then the neighbor or someone in the next road sees what they're doing and think, okay, this is a good idea. And it's how it's starting the ball rolling. So the conversation starts with just being humble and saying, okay, let's get something together. Let's see what we can do.
Wonderful. Sarah, I sent this through to you earlier, before we spoke, just because the quote resonated with me so much. You finish off in the book with a Walt Whitman quote saying, "I take the open road, healthy, free, the world before me." And as anything, I think quotes are interpreted very differently by different people. I quoted it. I sent you through sort of my how I feel about each of those phrases. Did you prepare something to sort of give me a rundown on why you used this and how you interpreted the quote?
I did, and I loved your interpretation. I did. I did take the first part of it, open road, as I take to the open road, specifically because it was on the section, the resource about road trips and about domestic travel. And so it was specific to road tripping, self-drives. That was what was in my mind when I saw the quote. And I love the fact that it brought in the words healthy and free. For me, the healthy side of it was about feeling mentally healthy to take on the challenges that this has brought. Not just as a business owner and not just as a traveler. It was basically a word that for me encompassed the fact that, yes, healthy, we can relate it straight away to feeling good, and we're not suffering from the virus, etc., and that's great. But for me, it was actually about feeling mentally healthy to take on the challenges that this has thrown at us. And the word free, immediately I thought from lockdown. We're free from lockdown. You can take to the open road because you're not locked in your homes anymore. And then the world before me, actually, when I first read that alluded straight away to me to this awakened consciousness and the new perspective that we have no choice but to consider travel and indeed life with a new consciousness, a new perspective. We just have to think of things in a different way to how we did before. So when it said the world before me, I looked at it in a way that was, okay, it's new, it's different, we have to react, and we're going to move forward in the best way we can from here.
Wonderful. And opening up so many different opportunities for people to engage about, I think I'm reading a book by Sebastian Junger called Tribe at the moment, and he speaks about natural disaster and then the immediate effects of a community afterwards. And you see a lot of things fall away, money, materialism, and people start going back to what it's like to actually live within a small community that all has the same, that all is going through a shared experience. And I think that when I read that quote, it got me a little bit emotional, because a lot of people are going through, or everyone's going through this pandemic, and everyone's dealing with it very differently. But we all have, for the first time in a very long time, a similar sort of experience that we can relate to and open up conversation. So I really want to thank you for putting that in the book, because it really resonated with me, and I'm sure it will do with a lot of other people.
Thanks. Good.
Great. So Sarah, thank you so much. We're going to jump into sort of Mandisa's segment, tourism versus poorism. I loved your chapter. I think if you don't mind me sharing, Mandisa, I reached out to you on LinkedIn immediately after reading it, and just said, I've been playing with, I recently, not recently, about 4 or 5 months ago, lost my job, and don't have a form of income, so started a small travel company, but just as well as a podcast to try and talk about my experiences and the people in my social circles' experiences. And one of them was, my wife had been working with an NGO, a nonprofit for a while now, doing surf school or surf lessons in Muizenberg, and one of their sponsors had pulled out of South Africa, and they really needed just money for rent and money for kids' meals and my wife and I are in no way sort of in a place to be able to give financially to them, and I thought, okay, I can't contribute financially, so I'm just not going to do anything. But after reading, your chapter really kind of pushed me to say, okay, well, what other skill sets do you potentially have? What conversations can you potentially have? What connections could you potentially have? And it pushed me in a direction where I would have never thought, oh, hang on, if I can't financially contribute towards something, it's not really worth pursuing. And I reached out, and you immediately responded on LinkedIn, which I was amazingly surprised at, because so many people are doing that. They're being receptive to conversations. They're being receptive to change. They're being receptive to helping, even when they can't. And I really wanted to sort of mention that and thank you for that, because it was something that I really appreciated. And township tourism, it plays such a vital role in the travel industry. But townships and poorer communities that benefit directly from tourism are some of the most vulnerable during this pandemic. What do you think the challenges as well as the opportunities are going to be in facing growing township tourism going forward, post COVID-19, and then really coming out stronger?
Hello, Peter. It's so nice to see you. Thank you so much for reaching out. That was lovely. We had such an insightful conversation. And as you're saying, we've had a lot of those. We just have time, I think. And this, as you were saying before, has really equalized the playing field. In it's non-discriminatory in how it affects and and infects, and everyone has received the blow and just had time to consider their own humanity. I think we've all had time to consider our own humanity, and I think that automatically makes us a bit more gracious towards the next person. So I was so glad as well, and so blessed to have had that interaction with you. Sure. And coming back to that and what's happening in rural communities at the moment, as well as townships around South Africa that really depend on tourism. Well, that's actually one of the first problems we've seen. I manage public relations and content management at the Mantis Collection, and we support a lot of communities in rural areas, and through a foundation called Community Conservation Fund Africa, also support education programs in surrounding townships around Port Elizabeth, where I am based and where I'm from. And dependence is actually one of the problems that we've realized during this pandemic, that it is unfair that tourism has become the only source of income, the only source of assistance to and it's a good thing that we are there and we help, but I think we should also be striving to do it more sustainably, to get communities to be able to do for themselves, and not only just wait for tourists. Because right now we're sitting with lodges that are empty, wines, for example, that contribute to conservation, beadwork that is done by women in communities, and they're sitting and now with nothing, with no income. So dependence is one of the things that I think we need to deal with. And then there's obviously poverty-related crime. I think another challenge that's going to come out of 19 in bringing people to townships and in promoting township tourism, because people have been forced even lower beyond the red line. And the beauty of the township, when I go elokishini, the beauty is that people who aren't familiar with being in the township see poverty and uncomfortable going into townships, because they have to face the reality of people living in different circumstances that they perceive as poor and poverty ridden, whereas the lifestyle in the townships, people are on various, in the chapter, they are on various levels around the breadline, above the breadline, below the breadline, but the nature of community and how people help each other and support each other, it's the beauty is that people have more ubuntu and they help each other, and it's not such a such an eyesore, something that should be unpleasant or like a topic of conversation the whole time. People get on with life, and that's the beauty and the resilience of people in the township, and that's why we have these businesses that come up. However, during this time, less people are employed, there is going to be the reality of an increased rate of poverty. And I think the best way that we can do this is through the suggestion of collaboration as well, and including communities. I found that when I go up to young men in Motherwell who are idle on the street, and I say to them, I've got this cleanup project, I'd love it if you guys would help me, and this is what you are going to benefit afterwards. I've never had anybody turn me down. When you give somebody an opportunity to experience something different and to make an impact, and then give them a tangible benefit, instead of, contributing to the problem, there's opportunity for them to become part of the solution. And I think we're going to have to use inclusivity and working with communities and collaborating through SAPs, community township tourism associations, through private within the community, because like you made the example of going to Muizenberg, a business that will benefit from a safer environment should invest in the solution for that environment as well. So maybe giving certain benefits and skills development and skills sharing to help alleviate that problem. And another issue, I think, which has been long, was existing long before lockdown, is the issue of infrastructure. I'm so sorry, Peter. I need to plug in my laptop.
No problem.
Please excuse me. Sorry.
Not a problem at all. Sorry, is everyone still around? Shanaleigh, are you still with us?
I'm still here. It's
Wonderful.
Just my internet connection
Perfect.
is terrible, so I apologize for that.
No
but
problem
I'm here.
Great.
Sorry about that.
No
Thank
problem
you.
at all.
And another problem that's been around, obviously for a while, especially in townships, is infrastructure. It's a huge issue, and it's part of the reason people also avoid going into townships, because you want to see beautified surroundings, and you want, if you take your car in, you want to drive on a good road. And the tender processes that government works on are unfortunately, have been corrupted, and there's a lack of transparency in making sure that the quality of the infrastructure work done in townships is that it's sustainable, that it lasts longer. So I think there as well, a more sort of collaborative approach and an inclusive one I've seen in Grahamstown, where community members, instead of having one business doing a project, where community members have received skill development and formed cooperatives, have formed building cooperatives, brick making cooperatives, and instead of one person benefiting from R1 million tender, you have quite a few community members who put the skills together and provide the service to the government, and the remuneration is then shared. So I think we really need to be creative about the solutions that we implement, and specifically to choose solutions that spread the income and make the pie bigger, and just have more people benefiting. Skills shortages, I think, are going to be another big issue after COVID-19. It's actually a bit of both. With a lot of unemployed people, people having been retrenched, there will be a lot of people sitting in the location, in the rural communities, who have a lot of hospitality experience, with who are sitting there without jobs, unfortunately. And then there will be youth, a lot of youth who have lost bursaries because corporates aren't able to fund them, for many reasons, having dropped out of school, and without the skills necessary to go into the formal job market. And I think there's a beautiful opportunity there for also skill sharing and development, where companies are not able to employ their people back into tourism for a long time. I just hope that those skills of those individuals can be used to train other people within the industry. I know that there are quite a few, I know of one in PE, a few businesses that have adapted during this time, where they were providing a service, and now they've registered with CETA and they provide training for that service. So instead of providing, or in addition to providing housekeeping services, they're now training unemployed youth with the skills and giving them that development. And that's a good cooperation as well with a government funded organization and a private business, and kids being able to get the skill without necessarily paying for tuition. So I think, there's the landscape and socio-economic landscape in townships has not changed. It's the same, but COVID-19 has amplified the issues, and it has magnified everything that has gone wrong within the township tourism landscape, or just the township landscape, and to begin with. But there is great opportunity, and I think, like we discussed, Peter, when for people to take an individual and personal interest in what happens in the communities around the cities, and get up and say, you know what, I don't have money, but I have the skill, I have this sort of influence. Let me go and find people to connect with, and to hand this over, and to plant a seed in a community that is actually still mine, because it's on the peripheral. It's right there, just next to the city.
Wonderful. And I mean, just finishing off, in one of your sections of the book, you mentioned that it takes a village, and that really kind of it resonates with me, because throughout this conversation that we've had with everyone, collaboration seems to be coming out quite a bit. And like so many things with collaboration, there's multiple stakeholders that come into play. And as an individual, you sort of you want to do something, and you have a project in mind, but it's always very daunting, because there are multiple sort of steps that you need to take, and it's sometimes often a lot easier if you can separate kind of, this is what I'm really good at, this is what I'm going to approach, and there are multiple other sort of stakeholders that are really good at what they do. Let's get them involved. And I'm talking private businesses and associations, tourism officers, industry leaders, politicians, communities. Are there? Can you give us sort of any practical examples that we can try and model? I'm a very practical type of person, and seeing it in play is often a little bit easier, that you can take a model and apply kind of and reach out to multiple stakeholders and say it has been done successfully. This is the suggestion that we kind of want to model it on. Do you have any of those kinds of examples that you can kind of give us?
Sure, I do, and actually one tourism related one is an example I learned after I'd actually written the chapter. I would have loved to include it, and it is Knysna tourism. I met a gentleman by the name of Sean van Eck, who had actually developed a very good model in Knysna. But in giving you I wish I could give you the inner workings of it right now, but I can't. But an example that I can is one that I have used personally. And honestly, Peter, I've found that you just have to knock on doors. If you want to do something, and if you have something to give, and you have an idea in mind, it's the pursuit of finding the right people to work with that actually just avails so many opportunities, and it avails so many people that are willing to contribute. And that has been my personal journey. I first started celebrating Tourism Month a bit differently in 2018 with a project that works with school children to clean up Addo Road, which is quite an important tourist route here in PE. And it's right next to the township where I grew up, which is Magwaxaza. And every guest review that we get, it's like, oh, it's filthy down there. Can somebody just clean up the road? And every second week, there's a letter to the Herald from, someone who drove past and from Warmer in the suburbs, like, can they just clean up the road? So together with Mantis, which is a private company, we rolled up our sleeves and we're like, okay, let's try and clean up this road. It's not on our doorstep. Our hotels are in Summerstrand, but our tourists are affected by what they see. And people that drive in from the city are also impacted. And in doing that, I've always been passionate about transformation. And Sarah was talking about local, domestic travel earlier on. And I think a big issue in South Africa is a lack of access to travel. We haven't quite developed a travel culture in the townships. We haven't developed, or almost unable to develop, a travel culture in the working class. And probably more so now because people can't afford it, which I think is something that we really need to tackle as an industry as well, in terms of how we structure rates and all of that. But in looking at inclusivity, I wanted to start with school children. I know, for myself, having worked for the likes of Lalibela and Pumba, the Cape Grace Hotel, and eventually Booking.com, where I got my first opportunity to travel overseas, that travel is an education. It is a privilege that opens up doors and can open up minds. And I feel that if we start including children from the townships and rural communities in tourism from an early age, then it will really foster a culture of travel within South Africa. And again, I was sitting in a meeting yesterday for Nelson Mandela Bay Tourism, asking how do we get the locals to be ambassadors? I was like, well, they need to experience things first. And if we want to build up that culture, we need to give people access. So we started working with the school children, and we got them to clean the road. The road is next to your school. You litter, it blows into the road. Eventually it gets to the sea. One day you're going to land up with a piece of plastic on your plate instead of a piece of fish. So we put education together, and we collaborated with the Waste Trade Company. We collaborated with South African police services, who came and also spoke to the kids and put the fear of God in them as, littering as a crime. The municipality, they took up all tools to assist in this. They brought in the traffic department. They supplied the cleaning equipment, the safety equipment. The provincial tourism office also got their hands involved. And it was such an amazing project, in that every sector and the community security forums, the community tourism forum were involved. And they were literally the adults chaperoning the kids on the day, making sure that everything was organized, that the recycling was done correctly. And for me, that was the greatest example of collaboration. You had private business, you had parents, you had children, you have community leaders, the government, tourism associations, local, regional, and and township as well, working together to create a cleaner tourism route, educate children about a life skill, which is environmental management, and then Mantis, obviously being so generous, provided the kids with lunch and food and everything. And we got sand parks to open up their gates. So every child out of the 860 that were present on the day got to go into sand parks for free on a sponsored bus trip with a sponsored lunch to go and see, when these people come past my house, where are they going? Because a lot of kids don't know. Why do I have to keep this road clean? What does it have to do with me? Well, there's wildlife down the road. Have a look. This is how this affects you. This is how money comes into the province, and we're able to do a lot of things. So that's been a really amazing example of how collaboration can work to improve township tourism, to improve the townships, to improve township economies. And I just want to see a whole lot more of that happening in South Africa. And I don't know if there's a formula. I haven't studied it. My formula has been knocking on doors and finding people. And every time I've found a willing heart and a willing wallet and a willing, mindset.
That's been the real recipe. And you know, I think it speaks to what we've kind of been discussing today is, you know, you have this idea and you have a sort of a, I've always tried to, in my limited experience in the industry, I don't have any sort of standpoint to the sort of amount of experience that you know, the guests that we've had today, but if you put it out there and you speak about it and you share your passion and your excitement about a subject or a project, people kind of hold you to that, you know, and I've had to check myself a lot, because, you know, my wife will often come to me and say, no more projects, please, because I often, you know, I get so excited about it, I throw it out there, and then 3 days later someone will have run with it and give me a call, hey, we're doing X, Y, and Z in a week's time, please come about. And then I've already promised a whole week of my time to a project that I've almost forgotten about. So, and I wish more people would do that, is just put it out there. If you're passionate about it, you know, and it resonates with someone, it always will. And like you're saying, knock on the door, try and get acceptance of your idea. And there's always someone that's willing to help, and there's always someone who's got that similar passion, albeit as extravagant or small as you might think or perceive it to be. It can have an impactful sort of, or it can resonate with other people. So thank you for sharing. It's really I think wonderful, sort of an example of something big or small that you can implement real time, really. Great. Navlika, I must apologize. I've left both yourself and Kobus for the end, because it's the most daunting of subjects for me. So we'll start with you, Navlika, promoting personal and workplace mental health in the age of COVID-19. And you know, I think it's something that I'll, if it's okay, I'll share a little bit of a sort of a personal standpoint, and we can mold that on the questions. You know, I first sort of went through when the pandemic hit. Everyone started freaking out. Tourism is going to end as we know it, but we don't know to what extent. Companies are panicking, suppliers are panicking, everyone's pulling money out. They want our refunds. And the first thing that a lot of organizations do is call a board meeting and say, how are we going to deal with this? And in some such situations, it's, okay, we're going to have to move into immediate retrenchment. And, you know, I remain an eternal optimist, but we are going through challenging times, and you know, I hope that organizations won't resort to sort of the mass retrenchment and no support. You speak a lot about support. That you know, our employees put so much into their passion, especially in tourism. I mean, you're hard pressed to find an industry that's that passionate about what they do, because it's so connected to what you love. You know, I can't go a day without being in the outdoors. It's something that doesn't sit well with me. If 2 days and I haven't been outside, I panic and I can't make business conscious decisions. I start acting far too emotionally, and Kobus, we can speak about why later on in the book. But you know, I hope that, you know, when companies are not reacting in a way of support, when they're not holding their employees through this time, and from a mental health perspective, and employees are being retrenched or put on long leave with no pay, what actions can they take to stay positive? You know, stay connected to the industry that they love, and really care for their mental well-being when they don't have the support from those organizations.
Thanks, Peter. It's such a great question. I just wanted to quickly say before I respond to that Mandisa, I'm also a PE girl. So you took me through, it was so nostalgic to listen to all your examples and take me back to home. But now I'm a Joburg girl, so thank you for that. Yeah. So Peter, I mean, it's such a critical question that you ask. And I thought I'd share a stat with you in terms of the support that you're actually asking about. Is internationally, about 60% of organizations do not have wellness programs in place. So we're already starting on quite a limited base. And more than that is about 61% of organizations don't offer their employees any kind of resource to support their mental health. So you ask such it's such a laden question, because there are many organizations that invest in the well-being of their people. In fact, we're working with one particular organization right now, which is obviously deeply affected in the same industry, going through business rescue. And the one thing they will not let go of is the support that they're providing to their employees. They're going to hold their employees' hand right through the end, whatever the outcome is. And that's actually not commonly seen across the board, because like I said, when I share those international stats with you, that's not the first place people are looking to support their employees, broadly speaking. So it's a really good and a really realistic question when you ask about what can people do when they're being negatively impacted and have no support. So I thought I'd just share a few practical things that the listeners listening in could think about and sort of apply quite immediately. The first thing is identify who forms part of your support system. Who are the people that you can tap into, whether it's family, friends, whether it's a resource down the road that offers some kind of form of assistance, or even a church, or whatever it might be. Who is your support? Who is your go-to person? And know that at the front of your mind, because often when we hit crisis, we're not thinking clearly, and we don't think of those people first. So at a time at which you're not sort of sitting in that crisis, it's important to jot these things down and to think about these things and reflect on these things, so you are more prepared when you are hit with any kind of crisis. So who is your support network, and how do you access them? Because it's one thing knowing who you trust and who you can talk to, but it's another thing knowing that you feel comfortable to pick up the phone at any given point and share that you're feeling really distressed about X, Y, and Z that's happened, and you just needed to talk about that. So one of the things I've been saying quite often, in doing a lot of talks around the impact of COVID-19 on mental health in specific, has been to really gain this perspective that how fortunate are we to be in a pandemic at a time where we have access to so much technology, and that we can connect with one another, and the collaboration that Mandisa has spoken about as well, that we can become innovative and work together in the socially distanced way, to still make things happen, to still be there for one another, to still support one another. Imagine being in a pandemic where we didn't have a digital means of connection. I couldn't even imagine what that would be for people's mental well-being. It would be all negative, actually. So there's so many positive things that we can do at a time like this, to reach out to one another using those digital platforms, staying connected with one another, staying connected to the industry, and even understanding where are some of the gaps. You talked about, Peter, people being in the travel industry specifically being so passionate about what they do, that right now, when we think about just shifting that perspective, do we view this crisis as a comma or as a full stop? A comma being that we need to pause and pivot our strategy with some thought, applying ourselves to that, or a full stop as in this crisis has resulted in a complete disruption in my life. I can't move on. I don't know what to do next, and everything's crumbling around me. So perspective is such a strong element in terms of how we manage this crisis and where we find ourselves. So in looking at some of the gaps that we might sort of find if we are willing to look for it, because otherwise we succumb to that sort of darkness, whereas there is the opportunity to rise, to innovate at a time like this. And how do we pivot so that we speak to some of those gaps? So as an example, what are people looking for right now? One of the speakers already mentioned people want to hear, I think it was Sarah actually, taking people through step by step. You need to hold their hand through this process. People want to hear about the safety measures in place. They want to hear how they're going to be sort of looked after in a way that they can still take that leap and go ahead with domestic travel that's opened up within your province. But they also want to know that there are all these, that security blanket is in place. So how do we then use that opportunity to close some of those gaps? And those are going to be the places that survive. Those are going to be the places that make it through this difficult time because they've reached out, they've understood what the need is, and they're talking to people. So there's that, people resonate then with the establishment, what they're trying to achieve. And I feel safe to make this decision. Even though I was hesitant to go anywhere, they've convinced me actually that I'm in good hands and I can do this because it's the right decision for my mental health and well-being at this point in time. So that's just an example about how we can also stay relevant if it hits us in terms of whether it's retrenchment or trying to keep the industry sort of pumping at this point in time when there's so much of negative impact that we can be focused on actually. Another point is to know your triggers. So I know that this is often spoken about in terms of when you're stressed out about something, what's your trigger? What has been the thing that results in you feeling stressed out? But of equal importance is to not just know your triggers, but also to know what is good for your mental health and well-being. So it's not just knowing what are the things that stress me out, and it can be simple things. It can be conflictual situations, or when I have too many things on my plate, or when somebody lies to me, or it can be multiple different things for different people that triggers your stress levels. But of equal importance, we need to know what is good for my soul. And for some people, that's being out there. And Peter, you already gave a personal example of you have to be out there. You have to be in touch with nature. You know that about yourself. And in fact, when you hit a wobble, that's probably one of the first questions you ask yourself is, have I been stuck indoors? Have I not sort of been in touch with myself? Have I not been out there? But you'd be surprised that there are many people, Peter, that don't know it as clearly as you do in terms of what is good for them. So again, before being hit by any crisis at this point, I mean, obviously we're already in a pandemic, so to speak, but there's so much that we can learn about ourselves and about each other in this time as well. And whilst the worst is yet to come in terms of, like you say, the mass retrenchments and the impact on businesses and those kinds of things, these are things that we can do to equip ourselves in terms of getting through this crisis. And so what is good for me? Is it having a hot cup of tea and reading a good book? So is it alone time, or is that the time I actually need to connect with others? Do I find that I isolate myself further if I spend too much time alone, and I actually do need sounding boards of people that I care about around me. So how do I plug into that? How do I equip my support system and the things that are good for me to be ready and available, so that if I hit any crisis, that I'm still looking after my mental health. Does that make sense, Peter? Absolutely. And I think that, the pandemic has sort of forced our hand a little bit by saying, look, you've got to be working from home. And it allows us to have a little bit more flexibility and freedom in shaping our day to, when we are in a stressful situation, my exercise clothes are right here, my bike is right here, I don't have to drive an hour to get home, I can just put my stuff on and I can take a short lunch and I'm out of the office, and then in an hour I'm come back and I can sit in front of my computer and knock out those emails that were stressing me out. And I think that the sort of pandemic has kind of forced companies' hands a little bit in saying, you need to be a little bit more flexible, you need to pay a little bit more attention to someone's sort of mental well-being and giving them the freedom and flexibility to be able to handle these kinds of situations and not let them build up. At least for personal experience anyway, that's been really important for me. Yeah. If I can just add to that, is often people use the term work-life balance. And in fact, that's an old term before the pandemic already. It's now, we should actually be talking about work-life integration. And the pandemic has just accelerated the need for companies to think about it from a work-life integration perspective, because that gives people more permission to wear all these multiple hats that they're wearing and wear it without guilt. So that you can then have the luxury of, and it is a luxury for some, but to literally put on your exercise clothes and have a workout in the middle of the day, because that's what you need to do to stay focused, to manage your own mental health and well-being. And the last point I just want to raise then connected to that is that another thing that we can focus on doing at a time like this, especially where companies don't offer that kind of support, is how do we build our own resiliency? Because resiliency can be learned. And I think that's a key message to everybody listening today, is that it's not innate. It's not something you're born with. Yes, some people are born with more resiliency levels than others, but you can absolutely work on building resiliency even as an adult. So how do we build our own resiliency? But more than that, how do we plan for prosiliency? And prosiliency, there's been a shift from resiliency to prosiliency, where resiliency is about, it's almost like it's reactive. You first hit with a challenge, and then you try and bounce back. So you feel like crap, you go through all those motions, and then you try and build up those pieces again and bounce back from that challenge. But when we talk about prosiliency, it's being proactive. What do we need to do to prepare for the challenge? The challenges are coming. It's in all shapes and formats for each and every one of us. If we haven't been through it already, it's coming in different ways and forms. So how do we prepare for that in a way that we anticipate the challenges before they happen, so that we scenario planning and we minimizing the impact when it actually does happen? And one of the things people can think about, and I mean, there's many different options, different things work for different people, but one of the things people need to think about is, what am I passionate about? What can I build a second career in? What can I do on the side that, how do I use my skills or bring my skills together in a way that I can still provide value in by contributing in a different way than my norm? So, I mean, I know that's it's such a big topic in and of itself, but I just wanted to sort of plant that seed in terms of, we all need to be thinking about those things. Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And I think, on your last point, I think that we're far too, well, from personal experience, I was often far too pigeonholed myself in one direction. So you're the sales manager, this is what you do, these are the sort of things that you have to cover in a day,
tick those off, move on, and build on that daily. And that's kind of the funnel that you work in. But the minute you start thinking, especially now when you have the extra time, what do you enjoy? Well, I enjoy speaking to people. Okay, what else do you enjoy? I like being outside. Okay, well, why not go and do a podcast while you're climbing on top of Table Mountain? It's something that I loved. It's a bit of a creativity. It's something completely different. Might not resonate with anyone, but I enjoyed it, and the people that we were with enjoyed it, and it gave me a little bit of a more creative spin on something that I would have never considered doing before. And I'm so excited to see more and more of this. I think Sangeeta is a wonderful example of that. They're starting to do game drives and filming it every morning, so it gives people that would have never had the opportunity to see wild dogs, interact with wild dogs for an hour and a half, following them through the bush live. It's something that's never been available, and it's because we're exploring different avenues that we never explored before, because we have the time available to us. And you see companies that they've got such valuable content and such valuable information to put out, but you see one post from them in a week, or one or two posts from them every couple of months. Now they've got the time to start exploring their artistic creativity and sharing a more personalized aspect to who they are and what they're about. And I've really started seeing that out in companies that I thought, they're just the big conglomerates that sort of, they think a certain way and it's just money at the top of what they want to achieve. But there's so much more behind them. Obviously, they're people, they're personalities, they're us, and you start seeing that come through in business because we have the time to explore those kinds of things. So it's really been interesting to see, and something that I'm really excited to follow, and I hope this trend continues. Wonderful. Navlika, thank you so much for that. Very informative. I really appreciate it. And then Kobus, I apologize. We've kept you right for the end, but some big words about to sort of come out in my questioning. I apologize if I stutter or pronounce them incorrectly, but I really wanted to touch on a phrase that you mentioned, and I think it's safe to say that a lot of us are in our sympathetic nervous system has kicked in, and that's sort of, in layman's terms, I think it's where you're put into a point of danger or confrontation, and it's your body's natural response to that. Can you speak a little bit more about that, and just set it up for us, and I think it'll work into the next part of our conversation.
Yeah, sure. Yes, obviously it's a balancing act to keep yourself in terms of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. The thing is, just if you in the sympathetic nervous system, it's disastrous because it's just releasing all these stress hormones and negative hormones, and it puts you in a perpetual state of fight and flight.
Yes. So
all the necessary to protect your immune system goes into the bloodstream, and it weakens you, and it's an amazing study in terms of what it actually does. So the challenge for us, given these circumstances, is how do I create a balance in terms of being more in the parasympathetic nervous system. But to explain that concept is that we need to recognize that probably the biggest emotion facing all of us is the emotion of fear, because fear, creates a lot of ripple effects in terms of igniting other emotions. But fear is the number one emotion that releases the stress hormone, and it's the number one emotion that affects our immune system. And if you look at it, Peter, guys, we all have a reason to be anxious. We all experience fear and feeling depressed and feeling anxious, and because we know that we are vulnerable. I mean, we acknowledge it. And to go around and say, well, I'm not vulnerable, will be a mystery to explain. And it would be quite naive of you to say, well, I'm not vulnerable in these circumstances. So what is the first step that you and I have, or that we all need, is, and it's amazing actually, is to be conscious about it. In other words, to recognize it. And as I've mentioned, to go about around in naivety is really not wise, because essentially what you are saying is that there are no dangers out there or around. And it's very important for us to be aware of what our problems are. And the reason is so that we can be alert existentially. And in other words, be fully self-conscious of our limitations that we experience at the moment, and how you and I might get hurt or be hurt, you know. And then once we are consciously aware of that, then to move to the land of the unknown, so to speak, because we don't know what the new normal is. Everybody talks about the new normal. So the question really facing all of us, regardless of what industry you're in, is what do people do with who are anxious, who's afraid, who's depressed, who's living in a state of perpetual fear? And the clinical literature on this is very clear, guys. It's very clear. It says, number one, lay out what you are anxious about in detail. Don't ignore it. What is that you are afraid of? What might happen to you? So lay it out. And then the second suggestion is, once you understand the detail of the anxiety, is then to decompose it into smaller little manageable problems, and then you expose yourself and you become conscious about the things that you are afraid of. Now here's the interesting thing. What happens then when you acknowledge that? Does it mean you and I become less afraid? No, the interesting thing is, once we recognize and be consciously aware of what is our fear, is that we become braver. We literally become braver. And when we become brave, now here's the interesting thing, there's something in me then wanting to take on more things on a voluntary challenge. You know? Then I want to grow and thrive and self-actualize. Because it's very important to recognize two things here, what is happening to you and I. Because we impose two types of stresses on ourselves. The one is the involuntary stressor. This is me, I'm waking up and I'm in the state of anxiety. Oh, this is the end of the world. What's going to happen to me? I'm no worth. I've lost my job. Nobody, I mean nothing. Oh, and we are really drama queens cum laude, so to speak. You know, and it's literally having the foot on the pedal and with the brakes on and the handbrakes on. Now, can you imagine that scenario? And then you're also using future resources because you're now in the fight and flight mode. But what happens if the stresses are voluntary? I know it. I recognize it and I decompose it. Now I'm actually a totally different psychophysical system in the brain, the prefrontal cortex. Now I'm consciously aware of what my stresses are, and now I'm ready, braver, to approach it and challenge it. And now I experience more positive emotion because I know what the heck is going on. Hello, sympathetic nervous system. Hello, I'm there. So I'm much less harder on myself. I'm operating from the prefrontal. I have higher order reasoning. I am far more sophisticated in my problem solving. I'm far more creative, fear regulation, and all those type of things. Now, let me give you a classical story of what happened just a week ago, just to explain involuntary versus voluntary. Get a phone call from a friend of mine, and the minute I pick up the phone, you can hear involuntary stresses. Hello, emotional crying. This is the end of the world. So what is happening? I don't know. You know, whoa. I don't know what has happened, but this is it. I'm finished. I mean nothing. Life is over. I'm worth nothing. I'm just a slave in the house. Typical involuntary. So I said to the lady, okay, hang on. That's not going to help. What have caused it? You know, go to the voluntary understanding. Decompose for me what it is. Long story short, she lives with a son and a daughter-in-law. She perceives herself as being only the servant. She has to do the cleaning. She has to do the washing. She has to do all of that. So we started with a process of stop the involuntary because you've got no control over it. What is the voluntary stresses? Because you made a decision to respond to it. And this is then also what is referred to as being either mindless, I don't know what the heck is happening to me, versus being mindful. So mindfulness means you retrain the brain, amongst other things, because you operate in the present. And, you know, guys, it's amazing, the studies that has been done on this, because scientists have at least identified 8 different responses to the brain that benefit from mindfulness. And I'll explain mindfulness now for you. But there's 2 significant ones I just want to raise with you guys this afternoon. And the first one is what is referred to as the anterior cingulate cortex. And where it is, it's located very deep inside the forehead, behind the brain's frontal lobe. But why is this so important, and why mindfulness and being aware of our stresses? Because it is associated with self-regulation. It's my ability to purposefully direct attention and behavior. You know, see there, the braveness comes in. It suppresses inappropriate knee-jerk reactions, you know, and responses. And it's also associated with learning from past experiences. I've been there, you know what, I've done that, worse things have happened to me, I've been without a job before, you know what, tackle the bloody, sorry, am I allowed to say that?
That's fine.
I'm getting quite excited here.
No,
okay,
perfect.
But now what happens if it's damaged, guys? Well, now I'm impulsive. Unchecked aggression. Hello, who, how do you, hello, don't you, hello me, you know, that type of thing. And then, and I'm holding on to ineffective problem-solving strategies. You know, I don't learn from my experience because it's damaged. And then, of course, the old hippocampus, sitting on both sides of the ears, and it's covered with receptors from stress hormones. Cortisol, it releases cortisol. And because of it being damaged, I'm in a constant state of chronic stress. I'm traumatized. And on the nucleus of the amygdala, it's the trauma is potentiated. It's like a glue, it's stuck there. And it really puts me into this sympathetic nervous system. I'm a wreck. But if you practice mindfulness, it affects the brain areas related to perception, emotion, regulation. This is what we want, ladies and gents. And it's a beautiful name. It's referred to attention economy. Its ability to maintain focus and to concentrate. So it literally keeps the brain healthy. That we all need now, guys. We all need the brain to be kept healthy. So, but how do I practice mindfulness? Now, okay, there, look, I'm just going to give you a short version of it. I mean, it's an amazing study. But you need to practice it every day. It needs to become a habit. And it starts at the beginning of the day. Because research has also shown that the most stress hormones are released the minute I wake up. Because the minute I wake up and I become conscious, what is happening? I'm already thinking about the day lying ahead, and I'm already worried about what is happening, not just this day, but what's going to happen at the end of the week. Oh my, the end of the month is coming. Never mind the end of the year. How am I going to pay? So there I'm sitting, I haven't even started my day, and I'm already stressed out, in the sympathetic nervous system, and there I go. In the cortisol is in the bloodstream, and I'm a wreck. So how do we manage this reality? Because it's real. You need to create, literally, guys, a mindfulness algorithm, so to speak. So let me go back to the example that I've used. So after she explained to me, this is what is happening, how do we create mindfulness? Now, she could sit there and say, well, I'm a slave. What's going to happen? I'm 68 years old. This is the end. Where am I going to get work? All of those involuntary responses. So I said to her, hang on. What is your involuntary? What is your voluntary responses? Okay, so what is the cause of what is happening to you? I perceive myself as a slave. This morning I had to do all the dishes and what have you. Simple, practical examples. Plus this. And then I said, okay, how do we exercise? What is one of the key focus of being mindful is to express gratitude. Because when you're in a state of gratitude, more than 1,200 positive chemicals are released in the body, of which the most dominant one is serotonin and dopamine. So that feeling of experiencing that. So have a look at what you, so as you clean, how do you look at that job that you are doing, for example? Well, I'm cleaning, but the same pots and pans that I'm cleaning was the food that provided a meal to you. So how do you look at what is happening? So we went through this whole process of saying, well, what can you be grateful for? Because now you control, you're being mindful versus mindless. And then, you know, we obviously don't have the time to go through each and every detail, but you know, there's wonderful breathing exercise, and people are saying, oh, for heaven's sake, breathing. You cannot imagine the science that has been discovered after the simple breathing modality. And there's also wonderful psychosensory modalities that one can use, and you know, that to release the stress, to remove the trauma from out the nervous system. I mean, we talk about goal visualization, affirmation, but affirmation is important, but it needs to be more than, okay, I'm just a good person, I'm just a good, valuable person. It needs to be more direct and more based on observing yourself and encouraging yourself in the moment. A lot has been said and written about affirmation, for example, but you need to be quite deliberate there. Now, let me give you a simple example. Let's say you have a negative thought, no one likes me. First of all, be conscious about it. Voluntary stressor, understand, now how do I become brave? Let's use the modality of affirmation, for example. And how do I do it? Well, the right people love me. You know, start having that mindset. How many of you, oh, I'm too old. Where am I going to get a job after this pandemic? I'm too old. Can you imagine you have a mindfulness approach by saying, wow, I have all the experience in the world I needed to start a new career. So it's all about how do you direct your mindset. But based on your question, Peter, how do I get out of the sympathetic nervous system into a parasympathetic? Key here is, one, consciously aware of what is happening, recognize it, then break it down, decompose it, and then look at that, and then says, okay, let me address that. So that, you know, that in a nutshell, in a nutshell, that would be one way of handling stress and functioning more on the sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system.
Fantastic. And Kobus, you know, when a lot to take in, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I'll have to go back and listen to that and apply those more practically. And I think that I don't want to dive too deep into, I did ask you to prepare to explain a little bit more about the reticular activating system as a premise to one of the other questions that I had. But I think I don't want to dive too deep into that because I think it's somewhat less practical than what I'd envisioned initially. But I at going through school and then going through university and then work, I've always tried to there were basic principles that were taught at school in terms of psychology, the human psyche, and how to sort of approach various sort of aspects within a personal standpoint, a workplace standpoint, for happiness to be achieved. And one of the models that I've always tried to, because simply it was the model that I could explain to myself more easily, was Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think I explained in the questioning that if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I mean, there are basic physiological and safety needs that need to be met in order to start focusing on the things that we're talking about now: creativity and finding your place and belonging in the world, and a sense of community, and that kind of thing. But right now, a lot of families and people are experiencing their very kind of income and source of safety and housing and food and the basic needs that we need to start focusing, get those done, and then we can start focusing on the things that are stem with the creativity and what I mentioned before. How do you is there a way that you can almost trick your brain into skipping those steps? Because, you know, I often find myself, you know, in an 8-hour day with a lot to do, but I can't get over the fact that, you know, there's about 3 weeks left, and, you know, I don't have that set salary coming in. So I need to hustle during this standpoint to make sure that I have food on the table, that I have a house over, you know, a roof over my head. And I think it's going to become a reality for a lot more people now during the pandemic that they have to face. I mean, how do you get through those steps, knowing that they are important, that you need to assign resources to those important physiological sort of needs, but also not having it damper the creativity and the sense of belonging and the community and the family and the relationships, and not damaging those relationships?
Well, absolutely, that's critical, because we're all suffering from these psychological wounds. You know, you made reference to Maslow and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because he was focusing on not what is mental illness, but what is positive mental health. And he developed his now world famous hierarchy of needs. And he, at the end of the day, says, well, it's not really pursuing happiness, it's pursuing meaning. You know, what's the meaning? And he phrased as his self-actualization. But now the statistics are against us, guys, because at the end of the day, prior to the pandemic, all the books that have written, all the research that's been done, people in this field are quite adamant and clear that hardly 1% of people really truly self-actualize, because most of their time and energy is focused on attending to the basic needs, the social need, the self-esteem need, and the love need, because we all carry psychological wounds of the way that we've experienced life and the way we've been conditioned and programmed and where we come from. So inadvertently, you and I, and at an unconscious level, are desperately trying to find meaning in life. So here comes the pandemic. So if the statistics were against us then, can you imagine the impact that it has on us now? Because now it's just been amplified. It's even worse now. So imagine us running up and down Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So how do we do that? You know, how is there a practical way, and at the risk of sounding patronizing or even minimizing it, how do we do that? Now, a lot of people will say, well, look, I have faith that a means will come, and that's wonderful. And that's but that's the placebo effect. So placebo works. But what is the biggest challenge for you and I is the nocebo. And the nocebo is, doesn't matter what I do, I'm doomed. I'm gone. I'm finito. That's it. And it's like you now say, Peter, worry already about 3 weeks from now. And without going too deep here, you must remember that we are electrochemical organs. So apart from all the chemicals that we release just by thought alone, we are also, because this is where Einstein says, the mind is the sole governing agency of the body. In other words, what I think and what I fear, I put all of that poison in the body. And then I behave and respond, so my decision-making is then based on that. But we also an electrical, because we are pure energy. So if I, in a perpetual state of fear and anger or worry, that's the energy that I then, express. And as that energy, now we move into a little bit into the field of, quantum mechanics, because now people are saying, it's nonsense. It's not nonsense. The law of attraction, the law of gratitude, the law of all those laws are starting to play because it's real. We can't maybe physically see it. So being an electrochemical organ, we're not just hurting ourselves biologically, but we're also now surrounding, and our life view starts to be very dim and gloom and so forth. So how do I maintain a positive outlook in the midst of despair? Guys, it's not easy. There's no miracle cure. There's no, go take a little sugar tablet and off you go. It is creating a habitual mindset based on a number of factors. And Peter, there are many of these. And two key factors here. And I've experienced it. I've been in the most privileged position to work with people who absolutely were doomed and gloomed. I mean, once again, just experience with a lady that walked into my classroom, lecture room, didn't want to be there. Long story short, listen to this. So it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very real for her, because she came to me and she said to me, okay, Kobus, this is what has happened to me. Now, I'm going to use the example. She said, when I was 7 years old, I was abused by my grandfather, sexually abused. So she said, but now listen to this, I enjoyed it. Because as a 7-year-old, what the hell did I know about this? At the age of 11, I was abused by my other father-in-law. Now I'm angry because I have knowledge. So here she sits in her nervous system. She has this guilt and anger. And as a result of that, where's the psychological wound? I'm nonsense. I can't be loved. It's my fault. My mother didn't do anything. So she sits with all this emotional baggage. And what you need to do there, two things happen. You need to remove the trauma, and you need to replace the trauma with something that's upbuilding and uplifting. And there are wonderful processes out there that can do both of those. So is there a quick fix answer, Peter? If you feel down, just do A, B, and C. No, it is a process. It's a process of removal and replacing, because the mind is susceptible to suggestion. The mind is ready for you to feed it, but you need to know how to access it. And this is often where, these one-day self-help programs or self-help books seldom happen. People go, read the book, and they're very determined to make a change in their lives and what have you, and then nothing happens. Why? Because they're working with a conscious mind, but the secret lies in a different mind, the subconscious mind. And like you say, if we go there, we're going to be here the whole evening and the whole afternoon and tomorrow, because there's wonderful information there.
Sure.
So Peter, yeah.
I think, that's I suppose why I wouldn't say procrastinated to have this right at the end, but I wanted to highlight the importance and finish off with the importance that this is now being engaged with, where in my limited experience in professional career, I've not had discussions about mental health in the workplace. It's never been something that's been at the forefront of any discussion that I've ever sat through, any wellness program that I've sat through. Look, I've got a very unique experience. So do hundreds of thousands and millions of people that have been employed by organizations and may have had really incredible wellness programs that do discuss these kinds of topics. But I think that it needs to be discussed more. In my social circles, I've reached out to multiple friends to engage with my experience with mental health and having to see a psychologist and a psychiatrist for the first time in my life. And I'm not someone whose default setting tends to be in that direction. But what happens when you can't gain access to that kind of help, and I think that it needs to rely on conversations to be had, and this is definitely not the format for that, but I think that people need to start having these conversations and being comfortable with having these conversations. At least in my experience, it's not happening enough, and it could be a very limited kind of outlook. But I don't feel like it's in the mainstream to be able to speak to these kinds of things in your workplace enough. So I really do appreciate you sharing, and and I think both yourself and Navlika, thank you so much for sort of engaging with the topic and writing so impactfully about it. I think especially in today's day and age, I think it's a nice place to open up a conversation about mental health in the workplace and having a positive mental mindset and how to start putting in parameters in place to have those mental mindsets. But I don't want to keep anyone much longer. I really do appreciate you spending so much time on the conversation. It's been almost 2 hours. I do apologize, but I just want to finish off with a point of gratitude, and I think Kobus, you mentioned this as well. For someone who hasn't had the exposure to the tourism industry, for as long. I've only operated in the tourism industry for the last 5 years, and not had the privilege and experience to engage with intellectuals in the industry like yourselves, and people that are so passionate about topics that are important. And I really just want to thank you for taking the time to share. I do hope that it resonates with people, as I'm sure it will. They need to pick up this book and read it, because it starts discussing topics of kindness and topics of practical action points that you can take in your business in South Africa, and there's not enough of that. So I really want to thank everyone for engaging today. Shanaleigh, thank you so much for putting this together. I really do appreciate it. Mandisa, Kobus, Sarah, Navlika, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. All the best. We've got some trying times ahead of us, but some really positive things to come out of it. And I can't wait for the future of travel and tourism in this COVID-19 scare. It'll be behind us in some format, but it'll be with us for our future. But I'm really glad that there are people like you in the industry that are engaging with it in a productive way and sharing your knowledge and expertise.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Lovely. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks for
Thank you for putting this together. Yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
I really do appreciate it. All the best, everyone. Thank you so much. And have a wonderful evening.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye now.
Bye.
And